Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking, and this is my review of the second episode of Season 4 of Lower Decks, called I Have No Bones Yet I Must Flee. And the episode begins with a Romulan ship, which looks like a new design of a warbird in which it's kind of sideways. And again, we see the Lower Decks people on the Romulan ship, so I love how every time in the show, whenever they show some other ship, we often see not the main bridge crew, but some lower decks guys. And so these ones are cleaning up the remains of some Riemann who was tortured in that room. And the torture chair looks exactly like the one in which Jordi was once tortured. So as always, I love the attention to detail in the show. And they are conspiring against their commanding officers, but are then called to the bridge because the Romulan ship encounters that same small ship that we saw in the ending of the previous episode, which I speculate by the looks of it, it kind of reminds me of those time ships that we saw in Voyager, those purple lights. And so my theory is that it's some kind of ship from the future. I would really love it if it somehow ties to Enterprise, to Future Guy, who we never got to know who that was, and I think this show will be perfect to play around with that. So anyway, this small ship easily destroys the Romulan warbird, and I wonder if each episode of this season will begin like that, with this ship constantly destroying some different alien ship every week, maybe even a Borg cube. Then we see the Cerritos, and we see Shax and Jack training in the same outfits as we once saw Troy and Beverly on TNG when they were doing some stretches, and so they're dressed exactly in the same way. And I love how in the background you can see those costumes of the Jiu-Jitsu, the ultimate form of martial arts, which we also once saw in TNG. So as always, excellent attention to detail. And Mariner overhears Jack talking trash about her, and then she decides to do what she always did, which is deliberately sabotage her own promotion to get demoted back to ensign. And meanwhile, Boimler is settling into his new room, which is his own quarters now, but it's right next to the nacelle, and so there's an annoying red light. And I think there was an episode of Seinfeld with this exact same idea, and so it feels a little bit unoriginal. And Mariner and Jack and some new ensign have to go to some space station which has a space zoo with many different animals from the galaxy, and they accidentally capture the two humans and put them in the zoo, and so they have to go in there to get them. And we see a bunch of different animals, and there's not that many creatures I recognize. I do notice that creature from Wrath of Khan, and some of them are just earth-looking animals with a horn on their forehead, so that's probably a reference to that dog from TOS, which looked like a small unicorn. So basically a dog which they just put a horn on to look more alien, so that's probably a reference to that. And this floating sphere with the three snakes on it, that's from an episode of TNG when Q was pretending to be that creature in one of his first appearances. And honestly, that design always kind of annoyed me because it makes no sense. Like, if it was actually Q's true form, then maybe it can make sense because, we also see these flashes of light. But if it's an actual animal, why would there be a floating energy sphere with three Earth-looking snakes popping out of it? So that did not seem very logical, but it was nice to see a reference in this episode. I think they could have done more in this one. Like, there are so many different cells of all kinds of animals, and yet very few I recognize. Maybe it's just my memory, so if I miss anything, let me know. And in that central tube, we see a flying snake, and we see some flying turtle birds or something, which I think we probably saw in an episode of this show. I think we had an episode in which they went to some starbase, which had like a biodome with a zoo in it, and so I think some of these creatures we saw previously on this show. And there's a cute, innocent-looking creature called a Moopsie, because it keeps saying Moopsie. And later on, it turns out to be the most dangerous creature of this entire zoo. And it kind of reminds me of Nibbler from Futurama, which also looked like a small, innocent, cute creature, but then it was the most dangerous animal that can easily eat any other animal. And by the way, quick note about Futurama, there's actually a new season that was just released. After 10 years that show was off the air, they came back, and honestly the recent season is kind of disappointing. Not as funny as before, unfortunately, so that's just a quick side review. So anyway, when they finally get to the cell with the humans, they're dressed in the same kind of outfits that we often saw in early TNG. Whenever they showed us civilians or kids on the ship, they were always dressed in those kinds of silly outfits. So I like this reference as well. And we see some scary looking monster creatures in a cell, and then they're terrified from the Moopsie creature. Whenever they see it, they kind of move back, and their legs are literally shaking from fear, so I guess they must have seen it before. the Moopsie managed to escape somehow and got into their cell, and then it drinks their bones, which seems really painful and scary. Maybe because it leaves the victims alive for a while later, they simply are immobilized because they have no bones anymore. And back on the Cerritos, Rutherford is desperately trying to get promoted because he's the only one who got left as an ensign in the previous episode, and he's working on improving all kinds of stuff on the ship. But there's some other guy that keeps beating him to it. He keeps doing it before he does. And he's then working on the two tubes without function, which really cracked me up. As you know, on my other channel, I made many compilations of this prop, which appeared in many different science fiction movies across decades, and I have a very long compilation of it. And it was shown in Lower Decks before as well, but never this close. And they call it the Tucker tubes, and so I guess it's named after Trip Tucker from Enterprise, implying that he invented it. And it doesn't really fit because we actually saw those tubes in an episode of Enterprise, but not on the Enterprise. We saw it on some space station in the background, and so it was already in existence during Enterprise, and we never saw it on the Enterprise. And so implying that Tucker invented it is a bit of a stretch, but I'll allow it. And Rutherford is trying to improve it, but then that other guy already did it by adding a third tube without collapsing the Heisenberg field or something like that. So they never explain what this device does. Actually, the chief engineer directly says that he doesn't even know what the device does, but he loves it. So that was a funny line, considering this most important device in the universe that we saw so often in so many science fiction shows and movies and in multiple episodes of Star Trek, and yet it has no actual function, which was mentioned by Shatner in the movie Airplane 2, when no one knew to explain what the device actually does. And so this was a really funny reference to me personally, considering I spent a lot of time collecting all the clips with this device in many different movies. So I'll have to add this one to the collection as well. Meanwhile, Boimler moves to different quarters, but it happens to be in between two different holodecks, and so he keeps hearing strange noises from the holodecks of people decapitating Peter Pan and having sex and all those kinds of things in the holodecks near him. So it's hard for him to sleep. And that painting on the wall, I think it's one of Data's paintings. I recognized it immediately. So I wonder how it ended up on the Cerritos exactly. Maybe it was a gift from Data to Riker, who then gave it as a gift to Mariner, who then gave it as a gift to Boimler, and that's how it ended up here. And eventually Boimler just moves to the Jeffries tube to sleep there without any noise. And he has small action figures. One of them is the evil Archer from the Mirror Universe, which is kind of strange. How would he even know about that? There was never any crossover of the evil Archer into this timeline, and so how would he even know about him? I have no idea. And at some point Mariner and Jack settle their differences, and then she knocks all his teeth out to use them as bait for Moopsie to get it back into its cage. And Tandy manages to get Rutherford promoted simply by reminding the chief engineer of all kinds of stuff he did previously. Then they discover it was actually the humans in that cell who released the Moopsie somehow, and so they decide to leave them for a few more days in the cage for some reason, which seems kind of unethical if you ask me. Like, you're on a mission to get these guys out. If they committed a crime, then you should put them on trial for that crime. You cannot simply decide, oh, we'll not save you now because you did something bad. And so maybe it was by accident, they simply wanted to escape. And in the end we see some other alien visitors to the zoo, and among them are the Antidians, those fish people that we once saw in TNG, who are the funniest aliens in my opinion. I always like seeing them. And in the end, Rutherford invites Boimler to stay with him in his new quarters since he did get promoted, and we see that he has a model of Deep Space Nine in his box. And it turns out they're now next to the other nacelle, and so Boimler is once again pissed off, but then Rutherford reveals they can simply adjust the window to block that light, and so it's not really a problem. It's kind of strange that Boimler didn't know that, and so he was stressed out the whole episode for nothing basically. And then Rutherford starts working on some project, and that device immediately looked familiar to me, but it took me a few seconds to remember what it is. That's actually the mobile tractor beam that Wesley invented in season 1 of TNG. So once again, some excellent attention to detail. I love stuff like that. And it's not in your face. Most people probably wouldn't even recognize it, but fans like me who love the details will probably enjoy it as I did. And so I do enjoy recognizing all this little stuff in the background. That's always funny to me. So overall I enjoyed this episode. It's not as good as the previous one, which had some more substance to it, and so this one is just some more jokes, some more funny stuff, but without any actual moral dilemma or a big story or something like that. So it's not amazing, it's not brilliant, but it is enjoyable to me personally, and much more enjoyable than the recent season of Futurama, which I found really disappointing. So that's it for now. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it all in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.